I devoted 50 years of my life to my son James. I sacrificed my career, my dreams, even my marriage to give him everything I never had. I nursed him through childhood illnesses, paid for private schools and Ivy League education, and stood by him through every crisis. But the day his new wife Vanessa demanded I sign over my estate, claiming I was too senile to manage my own affairs, I realized the child I'd given everything for saw me as nothing but a walking bank account. What they didn't know was that the trust fund my late husband established came with conditions that would shatter their greedy plans and change our family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun streamed through the bay windows of my kitchen, casting a warm glow over the marble countertops. I hummed softly as I prepared a breakfast spread that would make any grandmother proud. Homemade blueberry scones, fresh fruit salad, and my signature cinnamon French toast. James and his new wife Vanessa were coming over, and despite our strained relationship over the past year, I was determined to make this visit special. At 68, I still took pride in maintaining my beautiful Victorian home myself. The sprawling, four-bedroom house in Oak Ridge Heights had been my haven for over 40 years. My late husband Robert and I had purchased it when James was just a toddler, stretching our finances to the breaking point, but determined to raise our son in a neighborhood with the best schools and safest streets. The doorbell chimed precisely at 10 o'clock. James had always been punctual, a trait he inherited from his father. I smoothed down my cardigan, checked my reflection once more in the hallway mirror, and opened the door with a warm smile. "James, Vanessa, how wonderful to see you both," I exclaimed, opening my arms for an embrace. James leaned in for a brief, perfunctory hug. At 45, my son had grown into a handsome man with Robert's strong jawline and my hazel eyes. His once jet-black hair was now threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, and the wrinkles around his eyes had deepened since I'd last seen him 3 months ago. "Hello, Mother," he replied, his voice carrying a formality that made my heart sink. Vanessa stood slightly behind him, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. At 36, she was James's second wife, nearly a decade younger than him and worlds apart from Sarah, his first wife, whom I had adored. "Eleanor," Vanessa acknowledged with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. She had refused to call me Mom from day one, and I had long since stopped expecting any warmth from her. I ushered them into the dining room where breakfast waited. "I've made all your favorites, James. And Vanessa, there's that avocado toast you mentioned liking last." "Time." James glanced at the spread with barely concealed impatience. "You didn't need to go to all this trouble, Mother. We actually came to discuss something important." "Well, we can discuss while we eat," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "No sense letting good food go cold." We settled around the table, and I couldn't help but notice how Vanessa surveyed my dining room like an appraiser, her eyes lingering on the antique china cabinet and the oil paintings that had been in Robert's family for generations. "How's work, James? Still handling the Richardson account?" I asked, passing him the maple syrup. He nodded absently. "Yes, though we've expanded considerably. The firm just brought on 3 new corporate clients last quarter." "That's wonderful. Your father would be so proud of how you've grown the practice." At the mention of Robert, James's expression softened momentarily. My husband had founded the law firm 30 years ago, building it from a one-man operation to one of the most respected practices in the state. When he died of a sudden heart attack 8 years ago, James had stepped in to take over as managing partner. "Actually, Mother," James said, setting down his fork without having taken more than 2 bites, "the firm is partly what we wanted to discuss with you today." Vanessa placed her hand over his, a gesture that seemed more possessive than affectionate. "We've been thinking about your situation, Eleanor," she began, her voice taking on that condescending tone she used when speaking to service staff, or increasingly to me. My situation? I echoed, genuinely confused. Yes, your living situation, she continued smoothly. This house is far too large for one person, especially someone your age. The stairs, the maintenance, it must be overwhelming. I felt a flicker of irritation but kept my expression neutral. I manage just fine, thank you. Mrs. Hernandez comes twice a week to help with the heavier cleaning, and I enjoy taking care of my home. James cleared his throat. What Vanessa is trying to say is that we've been concerned about you living alone, especially after your fall last winter. The fall he referred to had been a minor slip on an icy patch of sidewalk while collecting my mail. I'd bruised my hip and was perfectly fine within a week, but James had blown it completely out of proportion. That was months ago, and it was... Nothing serious? I protested. It could have been, Vanessa interjected. Next time you might not be so lucky. And what then? Lying on the floor for days until someone finds you? I set down my teacup with a firmness that made both of them blink. I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself. Now, what's this really about? A look passed. Between them, the kind of silent communication that married couples develop. James straightened in his chair. Mother, we've found a lovely senior living community called Golden Meadows. It's exclusive, has excellent amenities, and provides different levels of care as needed. We toured it last week, and there's an opening in their independent living section. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. You want me to move to a retirement home? It's not a retirement home, Vanessa corrected with exaggerated patience. It's a luxury senior living community. There are activities, social events, and you'd have people your own age around you. People my own age, I repeated flatly. I have friends, Vanessa. I volunteer at the library 3 days a week. I'm taking a watercolor class at the community college. My life is here. James leaned forward, adopting the persuasive tone he likely used with reluctant clients. Mother, be reasonable. This house is worth nearly $2 million in today's market. That's money sitting idle that could be working for you. For all of us. And there it was. The real reason for this unexpected visit. I see, I said quietly. So this isn't about my welfare at all. It's about my house. That's unfair, James protested, but the flush creeping up his neck told me I'd hit the mark. We're concerned about you, yes, but it also makes financial sense. Why maintain this enormous house when you could live somewhere with less responsibility and free up that capital? Vanessa leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails drumming on the table. Eleanor, let's be practical. James is your only heir. Eventually, this house will pass to him anyway. Wouldn't it make more sense to liquidate it now, when the proceeds could benefit everyone? Benefit everyone, I echoed. Or benefit you, Vanessa? Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? I know about the expansion plans for the firm, I said calmly. The new office building you want to purchase downtown. Robert's old partner Gerald still sits on the board, and we have lunch every month. James had the grace to look embarrassed. That's a separate issue, Mother. Is it? Because it seems like you need capital for that expansion, and suddenly you're very concerned about my living arrangements. Vanessa's mask of concern dropped entirely. Fine. Yes, we need capital for the expansion. But it's not like we're asking you to live in some dreary nursing home. Golden Meadows is exclusive. There's a waiting list. People would kill to get in there. And you'd still have plenty of money left over after the house sale to live comfortably. I'm living comfortably now, I replied. In my home. The home your father and I worked for decades to pay off. The home where you grew up, James. My son couldn't quite meet my eyes. Times change, Mother, and frankly, we're worried about your decision-making lately. That took me by surprise. My decision-making? What on earth are you talking about? You sent $5,000 to that charity in Guatemala. Last month, he said accusingly. Yes, I did. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's an organization that builds schools for underprivileged children. Your father and I supported them for 20 years. $5,000 is a significant sum to give away on a fixed income, Vanessa added. It suggests you might not be managing your finances prudently. I felt a chill run through me. I knew exactly where this conversation was heading, and it wasn't anywhere good. So because I choose to continue the charitable giving your father and I always valued, you think I'm becoming incompetent? My voice remained steady despite the anger building inside me. James slid a folder across the table. We've prepared some documents for your consideration. A durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and a deed transfer that would put the house in a family trust that I would manage. I stared at the folder without touching it. You want me to sign over everything to you. It's for your protection, Vanessa insisted. If something happened to you, decisions would need to be made quickly. This ensures James has the legal authority to act in your best interests. My best interests, I repeated, a bitter taste filling my mouth. And who decides what those are? You, Vanessa? Mother, please, James sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. We're trying to help you. Many of our clients wait too long to put these safeguards in place, and their families suffer for it. I stood up slowly, gathering the breakfast plates that had barely been touched. I think I need some time to consider this. It's quite a lot to process. Of course, James agreed, seemingly relieved I wasn't outright refusing. Take a few days, but the spot at Golden Meadows won't be available for long. As I carried dishes to the kitchen, I heard Vanessa's voice, pitched low but not quite low enough. She's being stubborn, just like you said she would be. But she'll come around. They always do when they realize they can't manage alone. My hands trembled slightly as I set the plates in the sink. The beautiful breakfast I'd spent the morning preparing sat largely uneaten, much like the conversation I'd hoped to have with my son. Instead of reconnecting, I was being maneuvered out of my home and my independence. When I returned to the dining room, Vanessa was examining the silver tea service that had been a wedding gift to Robert and me. This is quite valuable, she remarked, running a finger along the ornate handle of the teapot. Antique silver like this could fetch a nice price at auction. It's not for sale, I said firmly, and neither is my autonomy. James frowned. Mother, no one is trying to take away your autonomy. We're trying to help you plan for the future. A future that conveniently aligns with your expansion plans, I replied. I'm not signing anything today, James. I need to think about this and consult with my own advisors. Vanessa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in surprise. Your advisors? You mean that ancient accountant who's been handling your taxes since the Stone Age? I smiled thinly. Among others. James stood up, clearly annoyed that this wasn't going as planned. Fine. Review the documents with whoever you want. But Mother, be realistic about your situation. You're a widow living alone on a fixed income in a house that's far too large for you. Golden Meadows is the sensible solution. As they prepared to leave, Vanessa turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're only looking out for you, Eleanor. Sometimes it's hard to acknowledge when we need help. Pride can be so destructive, don't you think? The condescension in her tone made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. Indeed, as can greed. Her smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. We'll check in on you next week. Do think carefully about our proposal. It really is in everyone's best interest. After they left, I sat alone in my living room, still, reeling from the encounter. The grandfather clock in the hallway, another family heirloom Vanessa had eyed covetously, ticked away the minutes as I considered my options. James had changed since marrying Vanessa 2 years ago. His first wife, Sarah, had been kind and unpretentious, always treating me with genuine affection. Their divorce after 15 years had been amicable, but had left James vulnerable. Vanessa, with her sharp ambition and expensive tastes, had swooped. Enduring that vulnerability, and within 6 months they were engaged. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I rarely used. "Margaret Wilson's office," a crisp voice answered. "This is Eleanor Sinclair. I need to speak with Margaret as soon as possible. It's regarding the Sinclair Family Trust." "One moment, Mrs. Sinclair." As I waited on hold, I gazed around my beloved home, taking in the family photographs on the mantel, the worn spot on the rug where James had played with his toy cars as a child, the view of my carefully tended garden through the bay windows. This house held 5 decades of memories. I would not be bullied out of it by my own son and his gold-digging wife. "Eleanor?" Margaret's familiar voice came through the line. "It's been a while." "Yes, it has," I agreed. "I think it's time we had a conversation about Robert's trust provisions, particularly the conditions we never told James about." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I take it something's happened?" "You could say that," I replied, a new resolve strengthening my voice. "My son and his wife just tried to declare me incompetent and seize control of my assets. I think it's time they learned that Robert was a much more careful man than they realize." Margaret's low chuckle came through the receiver. "I've been waiting for this day. Shall we meet tomorrow? My office, 10 a.m.? "Perfect," I said, feeling for the first time since James and Vanessa's visit that I had solid ground beneath my feet. "And Margaret? Bring the full trust documents, including the rider about attempted coercion of the primary beneficiary." "With pleasure, Eleanor. With pleasure." As I hung up the phone, a small, satisfied smile crossed my face. James and Vanessa had seriously underestimated me, and they had no idea what was coming. Robert, my brilliant, forward-thinking husband, had anticipated something like this might happen after he was gone. He had built safeguards into his will and trust that would make James and Vanessa regret ever trying to push me aside. The trust fund conditions were about to silence the room, and I couldn't wait to see their faces when they realized what they'd done. Margaret Wilson's office exuded the quiet confidence of old money and discretion. Located in a restored brownstone in the historic district, the law firm of Wilson and Associates specialized in estate planning for the city's elite. Unlike the sleek, modern glass fortress where James now practiced, Margaret's office featured dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and oil paintings of stern-looking founders. I arrived 10 minutes early for our appointment, dressed in a tailored navy suit that Robert had always said brought out the blue in my eyes. If I was going to battle for my future, I would do so looking my best. "Eleanor, right on time as always," Margaret greeted me, rising from behind an imposing mahogany desk. At 73, she was older than me but showed no signs of slowing down. Her silver hair was cut in a stylish bob, and her sharp gray eyes missed nothing. We had first met 40 years ago when she and Robert were classmates in law school. When Robert established his own practice focusing on corporate law, Margaret built her reputation in estate planning. She had handled our wills, trusts, and other financial matters for decades. More importantly, she had been one of Robert's closest friends. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I said, accepting her firm handshake. "For you? Always." She gestured to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Now, tell me exactly what happened with James and this new wife of his." I recounted yesterday's breakfast ambush in detail, the condescension, the documents, the not-so-subtle pressure to sell my home and move to Golden Meadows. Margaret's expression darkened as I spoke. "The power of attorney documents. Did you get a chance to review them?" she asked. "No, I refused to sign anything and said I needed to consult my advisors first." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Smart move. I'd wager good money those weren't standard documents." Based on what you're describing, they were likely trying to establish a conservatorship over you. A conservatorship? The word sent a chill through me. Like I'm incompetent? Exactly like that, Margaret confirmed grimly. It's become something of a trend lately. Adult children seeking to gain control over their parents' assets under the guise of protection. If they had succeeded, James would have had complete control over your finances, your medical decisions, everything. My hands clenched in my lap. They claimed they were concerned about my charitable donations, $5,000 to the Guatemala Education Fund, a charity Robert and I supported for decades. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. Using your generosity against you. Disgraceful. She opened a drawer and removed a thick folder stamped with Sinclair Family Trust in bold letters. Fortunately, Robert anticipated something like this might happen. She spread several documents on the desk between us. When Robert established the family trust 8 years ago, just before his death, he included several unusual provisions. Most people never read the fine print of their estate documents, but I think you'll find these particular clauses very interesting. I leaned forward as she pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. This is what we call an anti-coercion provision. In simple terms, it states that any attempt by a beneficiary to force, coerce, or manipulate you into changing your living arrangements or transferring assets against your wishes triggers an automatic penalty clause. What kind of penalty? I asked, a strange mix of sadness and vindication washing over me. Even from beyond the grave, Robert was still protecting me. Margaret turned to the next page. If triggered, the trust immediately reduces that beneficiary's inheritance by 70%, with those funds redirected to charities of your choosing. My breath caught. 70%? That's millions of dollars. Indeed. Robert was quite serious about deterring this exact scenario. She flipped to another tabbed section. There's more. This clause specifically addresses any attempt to establish a conservatorship or guardianship over you without clear medical necessity. If triggered, it not only reduces the inheritance, but also removes that person as a successor trustee. The implications settled over me slowly. James has no idea these provisions exist, does he? Margaret shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. No. Robert insisted these specific clauses remain confidential between you, him, and me. He believed, and I agreed, that telling James about them would defeat their purpose. The provisions only work as a deterrent if they're triggered by genuine bad behavior, not avoided through calculated compliance. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. So, if James and Vanessa had succeeded yesterday in getting me to sign those documents, they would have inadvertently triggered the penalty clauses and significantly reduced their inheritance. Yes. Margaret's smile widened. Robert always said you can learn a lot about a person's character by how they behave when they think there are no consequences. A sudden memory surfaced. Robert sitting in our garden the week before he died, looking pensive as he watched the sunset. "Promise me you'll be careful with James after I'm gone," he'd said. "He has good qualities, but there's a weakness in him. He's too easily influenced by the wrong people." At the time, I'd thought he was being overprotective. Now I realized how prescient he'd been. "What's my next move?" I asked, straightening my shoulders. Margaret closed the folder. "That depends on what outcome you want. If you want to teach them a lesson immediately, we could reveal the trust provisions and watch them backpedal. Or," she paused, eyes twinkling with a mischief I hadn't seen in years, "we could let them continue thinking they have the upper hand a little longer." What would that accomplish? It would give us time to document their behavior thoroughly. If they persist in their efforts to control your assets, we build a stronger case for triggering the provisions. Plus, she added with a wry smile, it might be educational for them to learn the hard way about underestimating you. I considered this approach, torn between immediate confrontation and strategic patience. I don't want to play games with my son, Margaret, but I also need to protect myself. Of course, she said, her tone softening. But consider this. If James is being manipulated by Vanessa, as it appears, a dramatic revelation now might force him to choose sides before he's ready to see her true colors. Sometimes, people need to reach their own conclusions. That resonated with me. James had always been somewhat impressionable, eager to please those around him. It was why he'd excelled in school but sometimes struggled with peer pressure. If Vanessa had that much influence over him now, confronting him directly might only push him further into her camp. "What do you suggest, practically speaking?" I asked. Margaret reached for a legal pad. "First, we document everything. Yesterday's visit, what was said, the documents they attempted to have you sign. Next, we prepare countermeasures, updated medical directives naming me as your healthcare proxy instead of James, a revocable trust amendment reinforcing your capacity and bulletproof power of attorney documents with someone trustworthy other than James as your agent." Who would that be? I wondered aloud. Most of my closest friends were my age or older. I'd recommend my associate, Daniel Winters. He's trustworthy, experienced in elder law, and has no connection to your family that could create a conflict of interest. I nodded, relieved to have a plan forming. And then? Then we wait for their next move. They'll be back. People like that always are. And when they return, you'll be prepared. She tapped the trust documents. "Remember, you hold all the power here, Eleanor. Not just legally, but morally. You've done nothing wrong." As I left Margaret's office an hour later, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness that my relationship with James had deteriorated to this point, but also a renewed sense of strength. Robert had foreseen this possibility and had quietly ensured I wouldn't be vulnerable. His final act of love had been to protect me even after he was gone. The next 3 days passed quietly. I went about my normal routines, volunteering at the library, tending my garden, meeting friends for lunch. But I also took concrete steps to protect myself. I gathered all my important documents and made copies, storing the originals in my safe deposit box at the bank. I documented my regular activities and appointments in a detailed journal, creating a record of my clear mental competence. I even asked my doctor to perform a cognitive assessment, which I passed with flying colors. On the 4th day after my meeting with Margaret, exactly 1 week after James and Vanessa's visit, my doorbell rang at precisely 6:30 p.m. I opened the door to find not just James and Vanessa, but also a man I didn't recognize. Tall, balding, with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase. "Mother," James greeted me stiffly. "May we come in? This is Harold Bentley, my colleague from the firm. He specializes in estate planning." I stepped aside to let them enter, my heart racing despite my outward calm. "Of course. What a surprise. I wasn't expecting company this evening." "This won't take long," Vanessa said, not bothering with pleasantries as she strode into my living room like she already owned it. "We thought after a week you'd have had time to consider our proposal." I noticed she had dressed more formally than for their previous visit, wearing a charcoal gray suit that matched James's. They looked like they were attending a business meeting rather than visiting family, which I supposed was exactly how they viewed this encounter. "I have given it considerable thought," I replied evenly. "Would anyone like some tea?" "No thank you, Mrs. Sinclair," Harold said, placing his briefcase on my coffee table and opening it. "As James mentioned, I'm here to help facilitate the estate planning we discussed last week. Have you had a chance to review the documents?" "I have," I said, settling into my favorite armchair while the 3 of them sat across from me on the sofa. "In fact, I've discussed them with my own attorney." A flicker of surprise crossed James's face. "Your attorney? You mean Mr. Peterson who did your taxes?" "No, I mean Margaret Wilson of Wilson and Associates." James visibly tensed. "Margaret Wilson? Dad's old friend? Why would you consult her?" "Because she's handled our family's estate planning." For 40 years, I replied calmly. And because she's the executor of your father's trust. Harold cleared his throat. Mrs. Sinclair, with all due respect, this doesn't need to be adversarial. We're simply trying to ensure your affairs are in order. My affairs are perfectly in order, Mr. Bentley. They have been since Robert died. Vanessa leaned forward, her patience clearly wearing thin. Eleanor, we've found the perfect solution for you at Golden Meadows. We've even put down a deposit to hold your spot. All we need is your signature on these papers, and we can handle everything else. The house? Sale, moving arrangements, everything. I met her gaze steadily. That's very presumptuous of you. It's efficient, she countered, and frankly, necessary. Your recent behavior has us concerned. What behavior would that be? I asked, genuinely curious what new accusations they'd fabricated. James jumped in. Mrs. Hernandez told me you've been forgetting to take your blood pressure medication, and you missed your bridge club meeting last Thursday. I almost laughed. I stopped taking that medication 3 months ago because my doctor switched me to a new one. As for bridge club, I didn't miss it. I chose not to go because I had lunch with Margaret instead. Harold pulled out a document with an official-looking seal. Mrs. Sinclair, we've prepared a physician's statement for your primary doctor to sign, confirming the need for additional oversight of your affairs. Now we were getting to the heart of it. Let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice deadly quiet. You've prepared a medical statement about my competency without consulting me or my doctor? On what grounds? It's precautionary, Harold explained smoothly. Many families find it easier to have these documents ready when approaching sensitive discussions with the primary physician. I see. I stood up slowly. I think this meeting is over. Mother, be reasonable, James pleaded, his expression a mixture of frustration and genuine concern. We're trying to help you. No, James, I said softly. You're trying to help yourselves to my assets while I'm still alive to witness it. Your father would be deeply disappointed. Vanessa's calm facade cracked. That's unfair. We've spent weeks researching the best facilities, making arrangements, all for your benefit. Without consulting me once about what I want, I pointed out. That's not care, Vanessa, that's control. Harold began gathering his papers, clearly sensing the meeting wasn't going as planned. Perhaps we should reschedule when emotions aren't running so high. There won't be a need to reschedule, Mr. Bentley, I said firmly. My attorney will be contacting your firm tomorrow regarding these unauthorized actions. I believe attempting to obtain medical declarations without a patient's consent violates several ethical guidelines. Harold paled slightly. Mrs. Sinclair, I assure you everything we've done follows standard protocols for family estate planning. We'll let the State Bar Association determine that, I replied. James stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. We came here to help you, and you're threatening to report us? Maybe this proves our point about your judgment. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. James, I'd like you and Vanessa to leave now. Mr. Bentley, you're welcome to take those documents with you. I suggest you review your firm's liability insurance policy before proceeding any further with this matter. As they gathered their things in stunned silence, I walked to the door and held it open. James paused on the threshold, his expression conflicted. Mom, he said quietly, using the informal address for the first time that evening. I don't understand why you're fighting us on this. We only want what's best. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of my little boy in his troubled eyes, and my heart ached. No, James, you want what's easiest and most profitable. Those aren't the same thing. After they left, I called Margaret immediately. They brought a lawyer with them this time, I reported, still shaking with a mixture of anger and adrenaline. They had already prepared medical declarations for my doctor to sign, claiming I need supervision. Margaret's voice was cold with professional rage. That crosses several ethical lines. Send me everything you remember from the meeting while it's fresh. I'll file preliminary papers tomorrow." "Papers for what?" I asked. "To trigger the trust. Provisions," she replied. "I believe we have more than enough evidence now of coercion and attempted financial exploitation. It's time to let the consequences begin." As I hung up the phone, I gazed at the family portrait on my mantel, Robert, James, and me, smiling at James's law school graduation. Where had that proud, principled young man gone? And would the trust's penalties be enough to bring him back? Or would they push him away forever? Either way, the stage was set. Tomorrow, James and Vanessa would learn that their actions had consequences they never imagined. The trust fund conditions were about to change everything. Margaret worked with remarkable efficiency. By noon the following day, she had prepared all the necessary legal documents and arranged for what she called a formal disclosure meeting at her office. Her secretary called to inform James that his presence was required regarding an urgent matter concerning the Sinclair family trust. Vanessa was explicitly included in the invitation. "Will they come?" I asked Margaret during our pre-meeting briefing in her wood-paneled conference room. "Oh, they'll come," Margaret replied with certainty. The word urgent combined with trust is like catnip to people with financial motivations. Besides, James is still a lawyer. He knows ignoring a formal legal summons related to his inheritance would be unwise. She was right. At precisely 2 p.m., James and Vanessa were shown into the conference room. James looked tense but composed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Vanessa had dressed for battle in a crimson designer dress with matching blazer, her makeup flawless, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe knot. Their expressions registered surprise when they saw me sitting calmly at the conference table. "Mother?" James nodded stiffly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I imagine there are many things you didn't expect, James," I replied evenly. Before he could respond, Margaret entered from her private office, accompanied by a court reporter and a young man carrying a video camera. "Good afternoon," Margaret greeted them with professional courtesy. "I'm Margaret Wilson, executor of the Robert Sinclair Family Trust. This is Clara Hayes, our court reporter, and Michael Donovan, who will be recording these proceedings for the official trust record." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Recording? Is that necessary?" "Absolutely," Margaret replied without missing a beat. "Given the nature of today's disclosure, complete documentation is essential." James frowned. "What disclosure?" "Your secretary mentioned an urgent trust matter, but provided no details." "Please be seated," Margaret directed, gesturing to the chairs across from us. "All will be explained momentarily." Once they were settled and the recording had begun, Margaret placed a thick folder on the table. "We are here today to address recent actions taken by James Sinclair and Vanessa Sinclair that potentially trigger certain provisions within the Robert Sinclair Family Trust." James leaned forward. "What provisions?" "I've reviewed the trust documentation." "There's nothing." "You reviewed the primary trust document," Margaret corrected him. "What you haven't seen is Addendum C, Section 4, paragraphs 12 through 17, commonly known as the anti-coercion provisions." She slid copies of several documents across the table. James picked his up immediately, scanning it with the practiced eye of an attorney. Vanessa leaned over to read alongside him. "This can't be right," James muttered, flipping through the pages. "These provisions weren't in the copy I received after Dad's death. They were intentionally segregated from the main document," Margaret explained. "Your father specifically instructed that these provisions remain confidential, known only to himself, me as executor, and Eleanor as primary beneficiary." The color drained from James's face as he continued reading. 70% reduction in inheritance, removal as successor trustee. "This is entirely legal," Margaret finished for him. "And, as clearly stated in paragraph 13, these provisions are triggered by, and I quote, any attempt to coerce, manipulate, or legally compel the primary beneficiary to relinquish control of assets, change living arrangements, or submit to conservatorship or guardianship without legitimate medical necessity as determined by no fewer than 3 independent physicians. Vanessa snatched the document from James's hands, her eyes widening as she read. "This is absurd. You can't possibly enforce this. It's vindictive." "On the contrary," Margaret replied coolly. "These provisions represent standard protections against elder financial abuse, simply with more specific penalties than most trusts contain. The courts have consistently upheld similar provisions in numerous cases." I watched as the realization dawned on James's face. "You're saying we triggered these provisions?" It wasn't a question, but Margaret answered anyway. "Based on documented evidence, yes. Specifically, your attempts to have Eleanor declared incompetent, your preparation of unauthorized medical declarations, and your explicit efforts to force the sale of her home against her wishes." James turned to me, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You planned this. You let us walk right into it." "No, James," I said softly. "Your father planned it. He anticipated that someone might try to take advantage of me after he was gone. He just never imagined it would be his own son." Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is a setup. You manipulated the situation to trigger these ridiculous provisions. No court would uphold this." Margaret's expression remained impassive. "Mrs. Sinclair, please return to your seat, and I assure you, the documentation we've compiled would satisfy any court. We have the original documents you attempted to have Eleanor sign, recordings of your conversations where coercion is explicitly evident, and witnesses to your statements regarding Eleanor's competency." "What witnesses?" Vanessa demanded. "Mr. Harold Bentley, for one," Margaret replied. "He's already provided a sworn statement regarding yesterday's meeting, including your unauthorized preparation of medical declarations." James paled further. "Harold made a statement against us?" "After I informed him of the potential ethical violations and his own liability. Yes," Margaret confirmed. "He was quite cooperative." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in James's eyes. "What exactly are you saying will happen now?" Margaret referred to her notes with clinical precision. "Per the terms of the trust. First, your inheritance will be reduced by 70%, with those funds redirected to charities of Eleanor's choosing. Second, you are removed as successor trustee, with that responsibility transferring to the secondary named party. Third, you forfeit all decision-making authority regarding Eleanor's medical or financial affairs." The silence that followed was deafening. James stared at the documents before him, his legal mind clearly racing to find a loophole, an escape. "This can't be happening," Vanessa whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her perfect composure was cracking, revealing the panic beneath. "We're in the middle of purchasing new offices. We've already put down non-refundable deposits. We need that inheritance." And there it was. The naked truth I'd suspected all along. They had been counting on my money, perhaps even spending it in advance. James shot her a warning look, but it was too late. Margaret was already making a note of her statement. "There must be some way to appeal this decision," James said, his voice strained as he struggled to maintain professional composure. "There is," Margaret acknowledged, and I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes before she continued. "The provisions can be waived by Eleanor, at her sole discretion, if she believes the actions were taken with genuine concern for her welfare rather than financial self-interest." All eyes turned to me. In that moment, I saw something break in. James, the careful facade he'd constructed crumbling to reveal the desperate, overextended man beneath. "Mom," he said, abandoning formality entirely. "Please, you have to understand. Yes, we need the money from the house sale, but that doesn't mean we don't care about you. Golden Meadows really is a wonderful facility. I studied my son's face, searching for the boy I had raised, the man Robert had hoped he would become. James, do you remember what your father always said was the measure of a person's character? He swallowed hard. How they treat those who can't benefit them. Yes. I nodded. And how have you treated me since you believed I could no longer benefit you? He had no answer to that. Vanessa, however, was not finished fighting. This is emotional manipulation. You're using guilt to punish us for trying to help you. No, Vanessa, I replied calmly. I'm simply allowing the natural consequences of your actions to unfold. You both made choices. Calculated, deliberate choices. Now you face the results of those decisions. Margaret interjected with professional detachment. For clarity's sake, we should establish the financial implications. The original trust designated approximately $4.5 million to James upon Eleanor's passing. With the 70% reduction, that amount is now approximately $1.35 million. Vanessa gasped. $3 million? You're taking away $3 million over a misunderstanding? It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said firmly. It was a deliberate attempt to seize control of my assets. James buried his face in his hands. The firm expansion, the loans, everything's leveraged against the inheritance. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You took loans against an inheritance you hadn't received yet? That was remarkably imprudent, especially for an attorney. It was my idea, Vanessa admitted, her voice hollow. The downtown property was perfect for the new offices. The opportunity wouldn't wait. For the first time, I felt a flicker of pity for my son. He had always been ambitious but never reckless. Vanessa's influence had clearly pushed him beyond his natural caution. There is one other option, Margaret said, glancing at me for confirmation before continuing. Eleanor has authorized me to present an alternative resolution. James looked up, hope flashing across his features. What alternative? Margaret slid another document across the table. A family reconciliation agreement. If you both sign this, acknowledging your actions and committing to specific behavioral changes, Eleanor is willing to reduce the penalty from 70% to 30%. That would leave us with just over $3 million, James calculated quickly. Correct, Margaret confirmed. Still a substantial reduction, but perhaps enough to salvage your expansion plans with modified terms. What behavioral changes? Vanessa asked suspiciously. First, regular family counseling sessions, I explained. Second, no further attempts to influence my living arrangements or financial decisions. Third, monthly family dinners, real ones, not business meetings disguised as visits. James picked up the agreement, reading through it carefully. And if we refuse? Then the 70% reduction stands, and all communication will be conducted through legal representatives going forward, Margaret stated matter-of-factly. Vanessa leaned close to James, whispering urgently in his ear. I couldn't hear her words, but her expression made her position clear. She was against any compromise. James, however, seemed torn. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Did Dad really think I would do something like this? The question caught me off guard with its raw honesty. No, James, he hoped you wouldn't, but he loved you enough to protect me even from the possibility. Something shifted in my son's eyes. A recognition, perhaps, of how far he had strayed from the values we had raised him with. He straightened his shoulders and picked up the pen Margaret had placed beside the agreement. I'll sign, he said quietly. Vanessa grabbed his arm. James, you can't be serious. This is extortion. No, he replied, his voice firmer than I had heard it in years. This is consequence, and it's far more merciful than we deserve. He signed his name with a decisive stroke, then held the pen out to her. Your choice, Vanessa. The tension in The room was palpable as Vanessa stared at the pen, her internal calculation visible on her face. Finally, with a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes, she took it and scrawled her signature. "Wonderful," Margaret said, collecting the signed document. "The modified provisions will take effect immediately. I suggest we schedule the first counseling session for next week." As the meeting concluded and the recording equipment was shut down, James approached me while Vanessa waited by the door, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "I don't know what I was thinking." "I do," I replied, keeping my voice low. "You were thinking of yourself, of your ambitions. That's not entirely a bad thing, James. Your father was ambitious too, but he never lost sight of what truly mattered." He nodded, looking both chastened and relieved. "I'll do better. I promise." "I hope so," I said, meaning it. "Because the day may come when you're standing where I am now, facing your own children's choices. What example will you have set for them?" As I watched him rejoin Vanessa, who was already speaking rapidly into her phone, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what our relationship had become, cautious hope for what it might yet be, and profound gratitude to Robert for his foresight. Margaret came to stand beside me as they departed. "That went better than expected. Do you think the reconciliation will stick?" I sighed, watching my sons retreating back. "With James, possibly. With Vanessa. I'm not holding my breath." Margaret squeezed my shoulder gently. "Robert would be proud of how you handled this. You gave consequences, but you also offered mercy." "Just as he would have done," I agreed. Later that evening, alone in my home, which would remain mine for as long as I wished, I raised a glass of Robert's favorite scotch in a silent toast to my late husband. "You were right," I whispered, to his photograph on the mantel. The trust fund conditions did indeed silence the room, but they also might have saved our son. Whether that salvation would last remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, I felt a cautious hope for James, and absolute certainty in my own strength to face whatever came next. The first family counseling session was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Dr. Lillian Chen's office, in the medical district. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit. The waiting room was tastefully decorated in soothing blues and grays, with comfortable seating and soft classical music playing in the background. James arrived exactly on time, alone. "Where's Vanessa?" I asked as he took a seat beside me, loosening his tie slightly. "She's not coming," he replied, his expression guarded. "She has a migraine," I nodded, unsurprised. "I see." We sat in uncomfortable silence until Dr. Chen, a petite woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner, called us into her office. After brief introductions, she addressed the elephant in the room. "I understand Mrs. Sinclair Williams was expected to join us." James shifted in his seat. "My wife isn't feeling well today." Dr. Chen made a note. "I should mention that the reconciliation agreement specifies that both of you attend these sessions. Missing the very first one does raise concerns about commitment to the process." James flushed slightly. "I'll ensure she's here next time." Dr. Chen nodded and proceeded with the session, asking us both to describe our perspectives on what had brought us to this point. I spoke first, keeping my tone measured as I recounted the pattern of behavior that had culminated in their attempt to have me declared incompetent. When it was James's turn, he surprised me with his candor. "I've made serious mistakes," he admitted, looking down at his hands. "Vanessa and I overextended ourselves financially with the firm expansion. We took out loans based on expectations that weren't guaranteed." He paused. "The pressure became intense, and I allowed myself to view my mother's assets as a solution rather than respecting her autonomy." Dr. Chen observed him thoughtfully. "That's an important acknowledgement, James. What do you think led you to that perspective?" He was quiet for a moment. I've been asking myself that question since the meeting at Margaret's office. The truth is, he hesitated, glancing at me. I started seeing Mom as an obstacle rather than a person. Somehow I convinced myself I knew what was best for her, but really, I was focused on what was convenient for us. The session continued for the full hour, with Dr. Chen gently guiding us through difficult conversations about expectations, boundaries, and respect. James seemed genuinely engaged, though I sensed there was more he wasn't saying, particularly about Vanessa's role in all this. As we left the office together, James turned to me in the parking lot. Would you like to get coffee somewhere? The tentative invitation caught me by surprise. I'd like that. We found a small cafe nearby, and over steaming cups of coffee, James opened up further. The firm is in trouble, he admitted quietly. The expansion was Vanessa's idea. She said we needed a more impressive address downtown to attract the right clientele. I let her convince me to leverage everything on securing that building. That doesn't sound like you, I observed. You were always so cautious with money growing up. Your father thought you'd make an excellent corporate attorney precisely because you were prudent and measured in your decisions. He grimaced. Vanessa says I lack vision, that I'm too content with mediocrity. Is that how you see your father's firm? As mediocre? No, he said quickly. Dad built something solid, respectable. But Vanessa comes from a family where appearance is everything. The right address, the right schools, the right social connections. When we got married, she had expectations about our lifestyle. I sipped my coffee, choosing my words carefully. James, may I ask something rather direct? He nodded warily. Are you happy? The question seemed to startle him. He opened his mouth to reply automatically, then closed it again, genuinely considering. I don't know, he finally answered, and the raw honesty in his voice made my heart ache. For him. I haven't asked myself that question in a long time. We parted ways with a tentative plan to have dinner the following week, just the two of us. As I drove home, I felt a cautious optimism taking root. Perhaps there was hope for reconciliation after all. That hope was short-lived. 3 days later, I received a call from Margaret. Eleanor, we need to talk. Something's happened with the trust accounts. 20 minutes later, I was seated across from her desk as she explained the situation. Someone attempted to access the trust account yesterday, she said grimly. They had your social security number, date of birth, and attempted to use your maiden name as verification. I felt sick. James, Margaret shook her head. The bank's security system flagged it as suspicious when they couldn't answer additional security questions. They were trying to transfer $250,000 to an external account. How is that possible? James doesn't have access to the trust anymore. He doesn't, she confirmed. But as your son, he would know your social security number, birth date, and maiden name. And while he's been removed as a trustee, there was nothing preventing him from attempting to impersonate you. I sat back, stunned. I can't believe he would do this. Not after the counseling session, after our conversation. Margaret slid a piece of paper across her desk. This is the account number they were attempting to transfer the money to. It belongs to Vanessa Williams Sinclair. It's her personal account, not a joint one with James. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You think Vanessa tried to access the trust without James knowing? It's possible, Margaret acknowledged. The attempt was made from an IP address associated with their home network, but that doesn't tell us which of them was behind it. The bank has flagged the account and implemented additional security measures. For now, your assets are safe. I returned home in a daze, trying to reconcile the seemingly genuine James from our coffee conversation with this new betrayal. Was he putting on an act? Had Vanessa acted alone? The uncertainty gnawed at me. That evening, as I was preparing for bed, my doorbell rang. It was nearly 10 p.m., far too late for casual visitors. I approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. James stood on my porch, looking disheveled, his tie loosened and hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "James?" I asked as I opened the door. "What are you doing here so late?" "Is it true?" he demanded, his voice strained. "Did someone try to access your trust fund yesterday?" I stepped back to let him in. "Yes. Margaret called me this morning. He paced my living room, agitation evident in every movement. "I just found out. The bank called our home phone while Vanessa was out. They left a message about suspicious activity." He turned to face me, his expression anguished. "Mom, I swear it wasn't me." "The transfer was attempted to Vanessa's personal account," I said quietly. He stopped pacing, the color draining from his face. "What? You didn't know?" He sank onto my sofa, his head in his hands. "No. God, no. I would never. Not after everything that's happened." I believed him. The shock in his eyes couldn't be feigned. "James, what's going on in your marriage?" I asked gently, sitting beside him. He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know who Vanessa is anymore. Or maybe I never really knew her." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "We had a huge fight after the meeting at Margaret's office. She blamed me for not fighting harder against the trust provisions, said I was weak for agreeing to the reduced penalty. Then she started talking about divorce." "Divorce?" I echoed, surprised. "After only 2 years?" He laughed bitterly. "Apparently I'm not the investment she thought I was." He ran a hand through his hair. "She keeps talking about her friend Claudia, whose husband just bought her a vacation home in Aspen. How her college roommate married a hedge fund manager who takes her to Paris twice a year." The pieces were finally falling into place. "You don't think she married you for love?" "I think she married me for potential," he corrected. "The son of Robert Sinclair, poised to inherit millions. A lawyer with his own firm and social connections. I was a good prospect on paper." My heart broke for my son, but I couldn't help feeling a measure of relief that he was finally seeing clearly. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I can't go back there tonight. Not after this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the attempted theft. Could I stay here? Just for tonight?" For the first time in years, I saw vulnerability in my son's eyes, the same look he'd had as a boy when he was hurt or confused. "Of course. Your old room is still exactly as you left it." That night, as I lay awake listening to the occasional creaks of the house, I thought about how quickly life could change course. A week ago, James and Vanessa had been plotting to take control of my assets. Now James was sleeping in his childhood bedroom while his marriage unraveled. The following morning, I found James at the kitchen table, already dressed in yesterday's rumpled suit, typing furiously on his phone. "I've contacted a locksmith to change the locks at my office," he explained without preamble, "and I've frozen our joint bank accounts." "You think Vanessa would take money from the firm?" I asked, putting on coffee. "At this point, I don't know what she's capable of," he replied grimly. "But I'm not taking chances. Not anymore." His phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at it, grimaced, and showed me the screen. "Vanessa." "You should answer," I urged. "You can't avoid her forever." He nodded reluctantly and took the call, putting it on speaker. "Where the hell are you?" Vanessa's voice filled the kitchen sharp with anger. "I came home and you weren't here. You didn't answer my texts." "I know what you did, Vanessa," James replied, his voice steady. "The bank called. They know someone tried to access my mother's trust fund." There was a brief silence before Vanessa responded, her tone suddenly honeyed. "James, sweetheart, I can explain. I was trying to help us. After that ridiculous meeting, I thought if I could just secure some of the money we need for the expansion." "By committing fraud," James interrupted. "By stealing from my mother?" Don't be so dramatic, she snapped. It's not stealing. It's family money. Money that should be ours anyway if your mother wasn't being so stubborn. James's expression hardened. It's not our money, Vanessa. It never was. And after what you tried to do, I doubt it ever will be. What's that supposed to mean? Her voice had gone dangerously quiet. I'm filing for divorce, James said firmly. I've already called Richard this morning to start the paperwork. You can't be serious, Vanessa scoffed. Over one little mistake? James, think about what you're throwing away. We're a team. A team? He echoed incredulously. Teams don't go behind each other's backs. Teams don't commit crimes in their partners. Name? Fine, she hissed, all pretense of affection evaporating. Go running back to mommy, but don't think this is over. I've invested 2 years in this marriage, and I will not walk away empty-handed. The call ended abruptly. James stared at his phone, a mix of emotions playing across his face. Anger, hurt, and underneath it all, a profound relief. I'm sorry, I said quietly, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up, surprised. For what? That your marriage is ending this way. That Vanessa wasn't who you thought she was. James shook his head slowly. I think part of me always knew. I just didn't want to see it. He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. Dad would be so disappointed in me. No, I said firmly. Your father made his share of mistakes too, James. What mattered to him wasn't that you never failed, but that you had the courage to correct course when you did. I've made such a mess of everything, he sighed. The firm is overextended, my marriage is over, and I nearly lost you too. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Not everything can be fixed, James. But some things can. And that's where we start. Later that day, as James went to meet with his divorce attorney, I called Margaret to update her on the situation. So Vanessa acted alone, Margaret mused. I'm not surprised, but I am relieved James wasn't involved. What happens now? I asked. With the trust provisions? Margaret was thoughtful. Given these developments, we could make a case for modifying the penalties again. James is clearly taking steps to right his wrongs. That counts for something. I thought about my son, flawed and human, but trying to find his way back to the man he was meant to be. Yes, I agreed. It counts for a great deal. As I hung up, I gazed at the family photos on my mantle. The past couldn't be changed, but the future remained unwritten. James and I had a long road ahead to rebuild trust and repair our relationship, but for the first time in years, I believed we might actually make that journey together. The trust fund had exposed the worst in some people, but perhaps in its own way, it had also revealed the possibility of redemption. 6 months passed with remarkable speed. Spring blossomed into summer, and summer faded into a crisp autumn that painted my maple trees in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Through it all, James and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. One conversation, one shared meal, one moment of honesty at a time. The divorce proceedings were anything but amicable. Vanessa fought viciously for a substantial settlement, hiring an aggressive attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces. She demanded half the value of the law firm. Despite having contributed nothing to its creation or operation, she wanted the house, the vacation property in the mountains that they'd purchased on credit, and alimony that would maintain her expected lifestyle. She's claiming she sacrificed her own career to support yours, reported Richard Dawson, James's divorce attorney and an old friend of Robert's, during a strategy session at my dining room table. Says she could have been a successful interior designer if she hadn't devoted herself to being your wife. James laughed mirthlessly. She decorated our house. That's the extent of her sacrificed career. I kept quiet during these discussions, offering support without interfering. James had temporarily moved into my guest room while the divorce worked its way through the courts. I worried at first that this regression to living with his mother might hinder his independence. But Dr. Chen, our family therapist, had a different perspective. "This isn't about dependence," she assured me during one of our private sessions. "It's about repair. James is reconnecting with the values and stability he grew up with. I've seen remarkable growth in him these past months." She was right. Away. From Vanessa's influence, James seemed to rediscover himself. He worked diligently to restructure the firm's finances, renegotiating the expansion loans and selling off non-essential assets. He reconnected with old friends he'd drifted away from during his marriage. Most importantly, he showed up, consistently and genuinely, for our family counseling sessions, even when the conversations were difficult. The breakthrough in the divorce came unexpectedly. One evening, James returned home looking dazed but relieved. "Vanessa's attorney called for an emergency settlement conference," he announced, dropping his briefcase by the door. "They want to finalize the divorce immediately, minimal terms." I set down my book. "That doesn't sound like Vanessa. What happened?" "She's engaged," he said. The words so unexpected I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. "Apparently, she's been seeing someone for months, some tech executive from Seattle. They're getting married as soon as our divorce is final." "James, I'm so sorry," I began, but he waved me off. "Don't be." "I'm not." He collapsed into an armchair, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "I just want this chapter closed." 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized with terms far more reasonable than anyone had anticipated. Vanessa relinquished all claims to the firm in exchange for a one-time settlement that, while substantial, was far less than she'd initially demanded. She kept her luxury car and personal possessions, but made no claim on the house, which was heavily mortgaged anyway. James sold the house immediately, used the proceeds to pay down business debt, and found a modest but charming apartment, closer to his office. The weight that had been pressing on his shoulders for so long seemed to lift. He smiled more. He started playing racquetball again, a sport he'd loved in college but had abandoned because Vanessa considered it common. Meanwhile, Margaret and I worked with the trustees to modify the terms of Robert's trust. In light of James's evident change of heart and Vanessa's departure from our lives, we agreed to reinstate a portion of his inheritance. 50% seems fair, Margaret suggested during our meeting with the trust committee. It acknowledges the seriousness of his actions, while recognizing his efforts to make amends. "And the remaining 20%? I asked, referring to the difference between the original 70% reduction and the new 50%. "Those funds will remain designated for charitable causes," Margaret confirmed. "But we could establish a family foundation that James helps administer. It would honor Robert's philanthropic values while giving James a voice in the process." The solution felt right, a balance of consequence and redemption that Robert would have approved. Life settled into a new rhythm. James threw himself into rebuilding his practice, focusing on the corporate law that had been his father's specialty, rather than the high-profile, high-stress cases Vanessa had pushed him toward. I continued my volunteer work at the library and my watercolor classes, but also began serving on the board of the Guatemala Education Fund that Robert and I had supported for so many years. Then came an unexpected twist, one that changed everything. It began with a letter that arrived on a Tuesday morning, bearing the return address of a prestigious law firm in Seattle. Inside was a formal notice informing me that I was being sued by Vanessa Williams Sinclair for intentional interference with contractual relations and prospective economic advantage. The lawsuit claimed that I had manipulated James and poisoned him against Vanessa, deliberately undermining their marriage. To maintain control over my son and the family assets, she was seeking $5 million in damages. "This is absurd," Margaret declared after reviewing the documents. "Pure harassment with no legal merit. We'll file for immediate dismissal." James was livid when I showed him the lawsuit. "This is low, even, for Vanessa. She's just angry that her plan to access the trust failed." I was less rattled than either of them expected. She's grasping at straws. Let's handle this calmly and by the book. Margaret's team responded to the lawsuit with a comprehensive motion to dismiss, accompanied by a strongly worded letter threatening counteractions for malicious prosecution. We expected the matter to drag on for months, but just 3 weeks. Later, something unexpected happened. My doorbell rang early on a Saturday morning. When I opened it, I found a young woman I'd never seen before standing on my porch. She was perhaps 30, conservatively dressed, with a nervous expression. Mrs. Sinclair, my name is Andrea Reeves. I was Vanessa's assistant at her interior design studio in Seattle before she moved here to marry your son. I think we need to talk. Over coffee in my kitchen, Andrea revealed a story that stunned even Margaret when I recounted it later. Vanessa has done this before, Andrea explained, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. She targets wealthy men, marries them, then either divorces them for settlements or finds ways to access their family money. She paused. Your son is her third husband, not her first as she claimed. Andrea had brought documentation, newspaper clippings from Vanessa's previous marriages, court records showing patterns of financial manipulation, even emails Vanessa had sent to Andrea outlining her strategy for securing money from James's family. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Andrea looked down. She still owes me 3 months' salary from when her design business folded. When I asked for it, she threatened me, said if I caused trouble, she'd make sure I never worked in design again. She met my gaze directly. I'm tired of being afraid. Of her. And when I saw she was suing you, knowing what I know about how she operates, I couldn't stay silent. Andrea agreed to provide a sworn affidavit detailing everything she knew about Vanessa's history and intentions. Margaret's team quickly amended our response to the lawsuit to include this new evidence. The effect was immediate. Vanessa's attorneys withdrew the lawsuit within days. Her new fiancé reportedly called off their engagement after being contacted by Andrea with evidence of Vanessa's pattern of marriages and financial manipulations. She's left Seattle, James reported after hearing from mutual acquaintances. Apparently she's moved to Phoenix. Starting fresh with a new name, she's going by Vivian Williams now. I sighed, feeling a complex mixture of relief and sadness. Some people never change, do they? No, James agreed. But some do. He was right. The transformation in James over the past year had been remarkable. He had rediscovered the core values that Robert and I had tried to instill in him: integrity, responsibility, compassion. He had faced his mistakes and worked diligently to correct them. On the anniversary of Robert's death, we visited his grave together, placing fresh flowers beside the simple granite headstone. I miss him, James said quietly, as we stood side by. I wish I could tell him I finally understand what he was trying to teach me all those years. He knows, I assured him, squeezing his hand. Wherever he is, he knows. Later that evening, we gathered in my living room with Margaret to finalize the paperwork for the Sinclair Family Foundation, the charitable organization we'd created with the portion of James's inheritance that remained redirected. The foundation would support education for underprivileged children, both locally and internationally, continuing the causes Robert and I had championed throughout our marriage. Dad would have loved this, James said, signing the final document with a flourish. Using family resources to create opportunities for others. Margaret nodded approvingly. Robert always said true wealth isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. As she gathered the papers, she hesitated, then pulled one additional document from her portfolio. There's one more thing, Eleanor. A letter Robert left with instructions to give to you if circumstances like these ever arose. I accepted the sealed envelope with trembling hands. Robert's familiar handwriting spelled out my name on the front. I excused myself to read it privately in my study. Inside was a single page, dated just a week before his unexpected heart attack. My dearest. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means our son has made choices that triggered the trust provisions we discussed. While that saddens me, I also know that adversity often reveals character rather than destroying it. You've always been the heart of our family, the one who sees the best in people even when they stumble. I've provided the structure to protect you, but you provide the love that may ultimately save James from himself. I couldn't foresee the specific challenges you might face, but I knew that whatever came, you would handle it with the same grace, wisdom, and strength you've shown throughout our life together. You've never needed me to fight your battles, only to stand beside you while you fought them yourself. Remember what we always told James? The measure of your life will be not in what you acquire, but in what you give away. The trust fund conditions were necessary, but they're only the beginning of the lesson. The true teaching comes from you, from your example of forgiveness balanced with accountability. All my love, Robert. Tears blurred my vision as I carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. After all these years, Robert was still guiding us, still believing in the best possibilities for our family. When I returned to the living room, James looked up questioningly. I simply smiled and shook my head. Some messages were meant to remain private, at least for now. Well, Margaret said, rising to her feet, I believe we've accomplished everything we needed to today. The foundation is officially established. The trust modifications are complete, and most importantly, she glanced between James and me with evident satisfaction. The Sinclair family appears to be on solid ground once more. After she left, James lingered, seemingly reluctant to return to his apartment despite the late hour. I've been thinking, he said finally. The firm is doing better now. Much better, actually. We're focusing on what we do well instead of trying to be something we're not. He paused. Dad built that firm on integrity and service. I want to honor that legacy properly. I think you already are, I told him. He smiled. I was thinking about renaming it. From Sinclair and Associates to Robert Sinclair and Son. A reminder every day of whose footsteps I'm following. The gesture touched me deeply. Your father would be honored, James. As the evening drew to a close and James prepared to leave, he stopped at the door. Mom, I never properly thanked you. For what? For not giving up on me. For believing I could be better than my worst decisions. I thought of Robert's letter, tucked safely in my desk drawer. That's what family does, James. We hold each other accountable, but we also hold on to hope. The trust fund conditions had indeed silenced the room that day in Margaret's office. But what followed? The painful unraveling, the difficult conversations, the slow rebuilding of trust, had given voice to something far more important. The enduring power of love to transform even our deepest mistakes into opportunities for growth. Robert had provided the safeguards, but in the end, it was our willingness to face hard truths that saved us. And that perhaps was his greatest legacy of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.